Imagine waking up every day knowing that 830,000 barrels of oil are being transported just for you, fueling your commute, heating your home, and powering industries. Now, what if that same pipeline could also raise gas prices, create environmental disasters, and spark a trade war? This is the Keystone Fidel Pipeline, a project that could change the way we think about energy, but not without controversy. Back in 2008, a Canadian company called TC Energy, formerly TransCanada, proposed the Keystone 40L pipeline, which would bring crude oil straight from Canada's oil sands in Alberta to U.S. refineries along the Gulf Coast. The idea was simple: 830,000 barrels per day, that's a lot of oil to fuel our cars, power plants, and industries. But like anything this big, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. While some see it as a golden opportunity to lower fuel costs and make the U.S. more energy independent, others worry about massive oil spills, higher emissions, and the impact on local communities. Over the years, this pipeline has sparked a heated debate. Could it help stabilize gas prices and bring more jobs? Or is it a ticking time bomb for the environment and public health? Stick with me as we break down how the Keystone 40L pipeline could impact your life, whether you're filling up your car, paying your heating bills, or just trying to breathe clean air. To understand why Trump's offer is such a game changer, we need to start by understanding the history of the Keystone 40L pipeline. Originally proposed in 2008 by Canadian company TC Energy, formerly TransCanada, the pipeline was designed to transport oil from Canada's oil sands in Alberta to refineries on the U.S. Gulf Coast, delivering 830,000 barrels per day of crude oil. At its peak, the project was expected to generate up to 42,000 jobs, according to TC Energy. Construction would create thousands of jobs, while the operation of the pipeline would create around 50 permanent jobs in each of the two countries. The economic boost was a major selling point for both the U.S. and Canadian governments. However, environmentalists, local communities, and indigenous groups raised concerns over its environmental impact, particularly the risks of oil spills, water contamination, and damage to critical ecosystems. In 2015, under President Obama, the U.S. government rejected the permit for the northern leg of the pipeline. But after Trump took office in 2017, the project was revived with a new permit to build, which caused a stir in both the U.S. and Canada. In 2021, President Biden canceled the permit once again, citing climate change concerns and international commitments to reducing carbon emissions. Yet, the debate surrounding the pipeline never really ended, and now, Trump's proposal to revive it has reopened old wounds. Trump has always been a staunch advocate of domestic energy production. During his presidency, he rolled back many environmental regulations to push for increased oil and gas production in the U.S. His administration approved major pipelines like the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone 40L. But now, in 2023, he's calling for the revival of this particular project. Trump's pitch is simple: revive the pipeline and guarantee easy regulatory approvals for the project. His promise to streamline the permit process, which has been bogged down for years, would allow the project to get back on track faster. He believes that increasing oil imports from Canada could reduce the U.S. dependency on overseas oil, particularly from unstable regions like the Middle East. But it's not all smooth sailing. The Canadian government has expressed concerns about tariffs and trade negotiations. Trump has previously imposed tariffs of up to 25% on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, which also directly impacted the cost of building pipelines. From an economic standpoint, reviving Keystone 40L would also have a direct impact on U.S. oil prices. Canada's oil exports make up 61% of U.S. crude imports as of 2022, and importing more oil from Canada could stabilize prices. As of August 2023, the price of WTI crude oil was hovering around $85 per barrel, and a significant increase in supply could help reduce future price volatility. Let's consider the everyday impact. If this pipeline were revived, one of the immediate consequences could be a drop in fuel prices for Americans. For example, gas prices in the U.S. have fluctuated from around $3.5 per gallon in early 2023 to $4 in the summer. More oil supply could mean more competition in the market, potentially lowering gasoline costs by 10% or more in some states. Canada is one of the largest oil producers in the world, with vast reserves of oil sands in Alberta. As of 2023, Canada produced 5.3 million barrels per day of oil, with 3.7 million barrels per day of that coming from the oil sands. The United States, as Canada's primary trading partner, imports a significant portion of its oil from Canada. In fact, Canada supplies over 60% of the U.S.'s total oil imports, and the Keystone 40 oil pipeline was projected to add another 830,000 barrels per day. If the pipeline were revived, Canada could see significant economic gains. In 2021, the Canadian energy sector contributed $153 billion to the national GDP, and Keystone 40 could contribute an additional $2.4 billion in annual revenue, especially during the construction phase. Canada's oil sands industry supports over 150,000 jobs in Canada, and the pipeline would provide a direct path for boosting employment numbers and expanding energy exports to the U.S. However, it's not all rosy. While the U.S. may benefit from a reliable oil supply, the situation is more complicated for Canada. If relations sour, for example, due to ongoing trade disputes, Canada could face higher tariffs on oil exports, which would drive up costs for consumers and businesses. For the average Canadian, that could mean higher prices at the pump. As of August 2023, gasoline prices in Canada averaged $1.6 per liter, and if tariffs or trade conflicts escalate, Canadians could see a 5 to 10% increase in fuel costs. One of the biggest issues surrounding the Keystone 40 pipeline is its environmental impact. Environmentalists argue that the pipeline would carry oil sands crude, which has a much higher carbon footprint than conventional oil. The extraction process for oil sands produces 3 times more greenhouse gases than traditional crude oil extraction. In fact, oil sands production in Alberta is responsible for 8% of Canada's total carbon emissions, and the project could add as much as 18.7 million metric tons of cotwo into the atmosphere annually. According to a 2021 report by the Environmental Defense Fund, if the pipeline is revived and operational, it would emit over 935 million metric tons of cotwo per year over its 50-year lifespan, which is the equivalent of 18.7 million cars on the road. The potential for oil spills is another major concern. A 2018 study found that pipelines carrying tar sands oil have spilled 3 times more than those carrying conventional crude. From 2010 to 2020, the Trans-Canada pipeline system saw more than 30 spills. If a spill occurred near critical water sources, such as Nebraska's Ogallala Aquifer, it could affect 2 million people who depend on this water for drinking and irrigation. From an everyday perspective, the environmental concerns could have long-lasting effects on health and agriculture. If a significant spill were to contaminate water supplies, communities could face higher healthcare costs and reduced agricultural output due to polluted irrigation systems. Additionally, the ongoing climate crisis could lead to more severe weather patterns, impacting the way people live, work, and prepare for natural disasters. Reviving the Keystone 40 pipeline could have significant economic and political consequences for both Canada and the United States. On the economic front, the project would create 11,000 direct jobs during construction and an additional 60,000 indirect jobs across the U.S. and Canada, according to the U.S. State Department. Canada's oil industry could see a major boost in revenue as the pipeline would allow more oil to be exported to the U.S., helping fill the $3.5 billion trade deficit Canada has with its southern neighbor. However, there are trade-offs. Canada is already facing uncertainty with tariffs imposed by Trump. If these tariffs were implemented, they could lead to higher prices for goods and services in Canada, as well as strained relations with the U.S. This could also hurt Canadian businesses that rely on trade with the U.S., which accounts for nearly 75% of Canada's exports. On the U.S. side, there's a clear political divide. Some politicians argue that reviving the pipeline is crucial for energy security and job creation, especially in states like Montana and South Dakota, where the pipeline would pass through. On the flip side, environmentalists and progressive politicians view the project as a step backward in efforts to combat climate change. The impact on everyday life. If the pipeline moves forward, we may see lower gas prices and increased energy jobs. However, local communities and indigenous groups near the pipeline's route could see long-term environmental harm affecting their health and livelihoods. On both sides of the border, we will see shifts in trade dynamics, potentially raising the cost of living for some. The future of the Keystone 40L pipeline remains uncertain, while the potential benefits of creating jobs, lowering energy costs, and enhancing energy security are significant. The environmental and social risks remain substantial. This is a debate that will not only impact the energy industry, but also affect our daily lives, from the gas we put in our cars to the air we breathe. As President Trump pushes for its revival, Canadians and Americans alike must weigh the costs and benefits carefully. In the end, the decision will determine not just the fate of a pipeline, but the future of energy policy, environmental protection, and global climate change efforts for decades to come.
In just 2 years, the United States has committed over $100 billion in military and financial aid to Ukraine, aiming to bolster its defense against Russian aggression. But now, President Trump's heated exchange with Ukrainian President Zelensky has shifted the landscape of global relations in real time. These events signal a dramatic shift in how the U.S. interacts with its closest allies. What's at stake? And how will these developments reshape the future of global politics, security, and trade? Let's break it all down. In today's video, we're diving into some of the most intense diplomatic tensions the world has seen in years. From President Trump's heated exchange with Ukrainian President Zelensky to rising tensions with the European Union and Canada, the landscape of global relations is shifting in real time. We'll break down the key events, the underlying causes, and most importantly, what this means for the future of international trade, security, and America's role on the world stage. With $100 billion in U.S. aid to Ukraine and escalating tariffs affecting both the EU and Canada, the stakes have never been higher. Stick around as we dissect the ripple effects these changes could have on everyday life, from the price of goods to the security of our future. Chapter 1. The Trump-Zelensky confrontation. On February 28, 2025, a critical meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky took place in the Oval Office. The primary goal of the meeting was to finalize a mineral rights agreement between the two nations, allowing the U.S. to access Ukraine's vast reserves of rare earth minerals. These minerals, which are essential for the production of advanced technologies like electric vehicles, EVs, and renewable energy infrastructure, are becoming increasingly important in the global transition to green energy. However, what should have been a diplomatic success quickly soured. President Trump accused Zelensky of being ungrateful for the U.S.'s ongoing support in Ukraine's conflict with Russia, stating, "You should be more grateful because, let me tell you, you don't have any cards to play with us. You have cards, but without us, you have no cards." This harsh rhetoric added fuel to the fire of diplomatic tension between the two leaders. To put the stakes in perspective, the U.S. has already provided over $100 billion in military and financial aid to Ukraine since Russia's invasion in 2022. With this kind of support at risk, Zelensky pushed back, emphasizing the need for more concrete security guarantees before Ukraine could even consider peace talks with Russia. He pointed to past failures in agreements signed by leaders like French President Macron and German Chancellor Merkel, which were violated by Russia. If the U.S. is unable to secure access to Ukraine's minerals, it could drive up the cost of EVs, solar panels, and other renewable technologies. Consumers may see higher prices for electric cars, solar panels, and smartphones as the cost of raw materials like lithium and cobalt rises. With the global shift toward green energy, this mineral deal was a significant piece of the puzzle. A delay in securing such deals could slow the adoption of clean energy, making it harder for people to transition to more sustainable sources of power and transport. Chapter 2. EU and Canada's immediate response. Following the collapse of the U.S.-Ukraine talks, European leaders were quick to reaffirm their unwavering support for Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, and Emmanuel Macron, President of France, were among the first to issue statements criticizing Trump's approach, emphasizing the importance of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Kaja Kallas, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, stated, "The free world needs a new leader," was a clear sign of Europe's frustration with the shifting U.S. stance on Ukraine. To put it into context, the EU has pledged over 45 billion euros in support to Ukraine in humanitarian aid, military assistance, and economic stabilization since 2022. European leaders have maintained a solid, unified stance against Russian aggression.
What if I told you that Trump's tariffs could cost you $80 billion a year in higher prices, and 3 million American jobs might be on the line? These tariffs are about to hit industries hard, from your automotive bills to your grocery prices, but are they really protecting American workers, or are they setting up the U.S. for a devastating economic fallout? In today's video, we're diving into one of the most controversial trade moves in recent history: Trump's new tariffs. From steel and aluminum to global trade relations, these tariffs are set to change the way we do business across borders. But it's not just about politics, it's about your wallet. Prices are rising, industries are shifting, and everyday life might look a little different. So grab your coffee and stay tuned as we break down how these tariffs will affect the world economy and how they'll affect you, whether you live in the U.S. or across the globe. Trump's latest tariffs focus primarily on steel and aluminum imports. A 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum from countries like China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union (EU) are set to increase. But why are these tariffs in place? To answer this, we need to understand Trump's core trade policy, America First. The goal? To reduce the U.S.'s trade deficit and protect American industries from foreign competition, especially in sectors like steel production, which Trump argues have been undermined by unfair trade practices. The U.S. imported 28.6 million tons of steel in 2023, with Canada being the biggest foreign supplier, followed by Mexico and Brazil. The total value of steel imports was estimated at $33.15 billion. By imposing a 25% tariff on imported steel, Trump's administration hopes to drive domestic production and protect U.S. steelmakers, who argue that unfair competition from foreign producers, especially China, has undercut prices. The aluminum tariff is equally strategic, given that the U.S. imported 4.8 million tons of aluminum in 2023, amounting to $28.29 billion in value. By imposing a 10% tariff, the Trump administration aims to bolster U.S. aluminum manufacturers, which are often priced out by cheaper overseas options. For the average American, the most immediate effect will likely be felt in the price of goods that depend on steel and aluminum, like cars, electronics, or appliances. Steel and aluminum represent 2% of the cost of a typical American car. This may lead to a $200 to $400 increase in car prices, depending on the manufacturer. The construction industry will feel the squeeze too, with construction material prices already rising by 20% in 2023 due to tariffs. This may drive up costs for new homes and commercial buildings, affecting both buyers and builders. As expected, the global community is not sitting idle. The European Union has already signaled a strong response, threatening tariffs on U.S. goods like bourbon, motorcycles, and denim. This isn't new territory for the EU. They retaliated in a similar fashion in 2018 when Trump first imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. But what makes this round different? The stakes are higher. The U.S. and EU share the world's largest trading relationship, valued at over €1.6 trillion, $1.7 trillion in goods and services in 2023. In terms of exports, the EU exports €503 billion worth of goods and services to the US, and imports about €347 billion from the US. The EU's counter tariffs could affect industries far beyond steel and aluminum, expanding the ripple effect across the global economy. The EU already imposed €2.8 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs in 2018, targeting goods like American whiskey, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and denim. This time, the EU could expand these measures, adding further pressure on U.S. industries. For instance, European sales of U.S. motorcycles totaled €9 billion in 2023, with Harley-Davidson accounting for over half of this market share. A 25% tariff on U.S. motorcycles could severely affect U.S. manufacturers, which rely on exports for a significant portion of their sales. For Europeans, it could mean higher prices for U.S. products. Expect to pay more for Harley-Davidson motorcycles, American whiskey, or jeans made in the U.S. For global consumers, disruptions in the tech industry could lead to delayed product releases or higher prices for popular tech gadgets. In 2023, Apple alone made up 27.6% of the global smartphone market, so any impact on its supply chain could translate into higher prices for iPhones or delayed availability. While tariffs are intended to protect domestic industries, they often come with unintended consequences. The World Trade Organization, WTO, has already raised concerns about the potential for a global recession as a result of escalating trade wars. By disrupting supply chains and increasing costs for manufacturers worldwide, Trump's tariffs could slow down global economic growth. China is particularly affected, given its massive role in global steel production. China produced over 1 billion metric tons of steel in 2023, accounting for over 50% of the global supply. The United States tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum have already triggered China's own retaliatory tariffs, particularly on agricultural goods like soybeans and pork. China is one of the largest markets for U.S. farmers, with exports of U.S. agricultural products reaching $33.7 billion in 2023. If this trade war intensifies, U.S. farmers, particularly those in Midwestern states, may face lower prices for their goods due to China's reduced demand. In 2023 U.S., soybean exports to China dropped by 15%, which cost farmers $1.4 billion. For the average American family, the consequences could be far-reaching. If U.S. farmers lose access to Chinese markets, it could lead to surpluses of certain crops in the U.S., which may depress prices. But for consumers, this could also translate into price hikes on certain foods. Soybeans are a major ingredient in animal feed, meaning higher feed prices could raise the cost of meat and dairy. Similarly, delays in the delivery of products that rely on Chinese manufacturing, such as toys, electronics, and apparel, could become more common. The global supply chain has already faced disruptions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this trade war may extend delays, making it difficult for companies to stockpile inventory for holiday seasons or peak sales periods. Trump's tariffs are designed to boost the U.S. economy by pushing more domestic production. However, there are potential pitfalls. U.S. businesses that rely on imported steel, e.g., automobile manufacturers like General Motors and Ford, could face higher costs. This, in turn, might reduce profit margins or lead to job cuts in industries reliant on global supply chains. In 2023, the automobile industry in the U.S. accounted for over $430 billion in sales, with foreign imports representing a significant portion. In total, the U.S. steel industry is worth approximately $53 billion annually. While tariffs may increase domestic production, they will likely raise the cost of production for many industries, leading to price hikes for consumers. On the other hand, there's a strong argument that the tariffs will push U.S. manufacturers to invest in more advanced production methods, including automation. If successful, this could lead to long-term gains in the manufacturing sector, but at the cost of labor. While some jobs might be created, the shift toward robotics and AI in manufacturing could mean fewer jobs for the average American worker. The U.S. manufacturing sector employed 12.7 million workers in 2023, but estimates suggest that robotics could displace as many as 1.5 million U.S. manufacturing jobs by 2030, making this an area of concern for the future. The economic shift toward more automation might create some fascinating changes. If you're in a manufacturing job, automation could reduce the number of available positions, even as businesses in the sector grow. Similarly, unemployment rates may rise in certain areas, while others, particularly those dependent on higher-skilled jobs in tech or management, see growth. One of the most controversial aspects of Trump's tariffs is the potential for them to signal the end of the liberal global trading order that has dominated the last few decades. Historically, the U.S. has been a strong advocate for free trade agreements, which aim to reduce barriers and encourage global economic integration. However, Trump's policies reflect a shift toward protectionism, where tariffs and trade barriers become tools to protect national interests. This marks a significant departure from the more collaborative approach seen in previous administrations. If this trend continues, the global trading system could become more fragmented, with countries focusing on regional trade deals rather than global agreements. In 2023, global trade accounted for $25 trillion in goods and services, with free trade agreements contributing to about 70% of that figure. A shift towards protectionism could severely disrupt the flow of goods across borders. A more fragmented global trade system could lead to higher prices, more trade wars, and supply chain bottlenecks. This may mean higher costs for goods from around the world, particularly those from emerging markets, as tariffs and taxes increase. As we've seen, the implications of Trump's tariffs are wide-reaching and complex. While the intention is to protect U.S. industries and workers, the reality is that these tariffs have the potential to impact everyone from consumers in the U.S. to global suppliers and manufacturers. The rise in prices could be just the tip of the iceberg. The question is, how far will the ripple effects extend, and will the U.S. trade policy shift permanently change the global economy? Stay tuned as these events unfold, and let us know what you think about these tariffs. How do you think they'll affect you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on global trade, economics, and everything in between. What if the prices at your local supermarket dropped overnight? How would your job opportunities change if emerging economies took control of global trade? Could a new global alliance reshape your everyday life? Have you ever wondered how global economic power influences your daily expenses, job security, or even the quality of public services? Today, we're exploring a groundbreaking shift in international economics, the dramatic expansion of the BRICS bloc. Originally formed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS is now attracting interest from 23 new countries. What does this mean for the future of global trade and for you, the everyday consumer? Stay tuned as we break down how this bold move could lead to lower tariffs, more competitive prices, and a new economic balance that might just transform your world. Chapter 1. The evolution of BRICS started as a concept in the early 2000s, a grouping of emerging economies poised to challenge the Western financial order. Initially, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa united mainly for economic growth. Fast forward to early 2025, and the alliance has morphed into a major geopolitical force, now attracting interest from 30 additional countries. With BRICS now representing over half of the world's population and a significant share of global GDP, this evolution signals a shift toward a more multipolar world. This evolution isn't just for policymakers. For the average person, a stronger BRICS means that countries once on the sidelines are gaining influence. This can translate into more competitive prices for goods imported from emerging markets and potentially more jobs in sectors like manufacturing and technology as these economies grow. For instance, consumers in countries like Nigeria or Indonesia might see better access to products and services, along with more stable local prices as these nations leverage their new global influence. Chapter 2. The strategic significance of new members. Zooming in on key new members, Nigeria and Indonesia exemplify how BRICS expansion isn't merely about increasing numbers, it's about strategic geographic and resource advantages. Nigeria, with its vast natural resources and over 200 million people, boosts the bloc's influence in Africa. Indonesia, a major trade hub in Southeast Asia with a booming economy and 280 million people, helps extend BRICS' reach into a critical region for global commerce. Their inclusion reshapes the economic mix and gives the bloc more negotiating power in international trade. For everyday citizens, this shift can lead to improved infrastructure, better public services, and lower import costs. In Nigeria, for example, enhanced participation in global trade could spur investments in roads, schools, and hospitals. In Indonesia, consumers might enjoy more competitive pricing on electronics or clothing as the nation harnesses its strategic position. Small business owners may find new export opportunities, while workers could see job growth spurred by increased international investment. Chapter 3. The 0% Tariff Initiative and Economic Integration. One of the most transformative policies emerging from the expanded BRICS is the 0% Tariff Initiative. By eliminating tariffs among member nations, BRICS aims to create a frictionless trading environment. This move lowers transaction costs, boosts intra-block trade, and makes goods and services more affordable. When countries trade using local currencies, it reduces exchange rate risks and fortifies economic independence. Imagine a scenario where your local supermarket prices fall because imported goods no longer carry hefty tariff charges. Shoppers might see lower prices on everyday items like electronics, food, and clothing. In local markets, businesses could expand their offerings. Have you noticed how electric vehicles are getting more expensive? What if I told you a 25% tariff could make your dream EV even less affordable? And it's not just happening in the US. A trade war between the US and Canada could leave you paying thousands more for that shiny new electric car you've been eyeing. The electric vehicle market is growing fast, and governments on both sides of the border are pushing for cleaner, greener cars. But now, the North American EV landscape is being shaken by a trade war that could turn the road ahead into a detour. Tariffs on US-made EVs are climbing, and that means the cars we all thought would help save the planet might soon be out of reach for many buyers. In today's video, we're diving deep into how these tariff changes could completely alter the way we think about electric vehicles, the prices we pay, and even how quickly we can transition away from gas-powered cars. From supply chain headaches to rising prices, we'll break down the full picture of how this trade conflict will affect your next car purchase and what it means for the future of EVs. Stick around to the end, because this shift might be more than just a price increase. It could be a huge roadblock in the fight against climate change. So let's break it down. In early 2025, Canada announced a 25% tariff on electric vehicles imported from the US in retaliation to President Trump's economic pressure tactics on Canadian goods. This decision came after a series of escalating tensions between the two countries, where trade wars and disputes over issues like fentanyl and supply chains dominated the headlines. At the heart of this tariff war are the electric vehicles produced by major automakers like Tesla, Ford, and General Motors. These companies have historically relied on cross-border supply chains, where parts for EVs are made in one country, assembled in another, and then sold across borders without heavy tariffs. But with these new tariffs, the flow of EVs between the US and Canada is going to get more complicated and significantly more expensive. The top-selling electric vehicles in Canada, such as the Tesla Model 3 and the Chevrolet Bolt, are manufactured in the US. With the 25% tariff imposed, these EVs could see prices increase by as much as $5,000 to $7,000. For example, the Tesla Model 3, which currently starts at $42,990 USD, could increase by a significant 12 to 15% due to these tariffs. This would make the car significantly less affordable for Canadian consumers. Consumers in Canada could find themselves paying $5,000 to $7,000 more for a new Tesla or Ford Mustang Mach-E. This is particularly concerning because EV prices in Canada have already been climbing due to inflation and rising raw material costs. If you're in Canada and planning to buy a Tesla or a GM EV, you may want to brace for higher prices or even longer wait times as companies may struggle to adapt their supply chains. It's possible the cost of these tariffs will be passed on directly to consumers, making the transition to EVs even more difficult for the average buyer. The EV market isn't just about finished vehicles, it's about the complex web of parts, suppliers, and manufacturers that make it all possible. For example, critical components like batteries, electric motors, and microchips are often sourced from different countries, then assembled into the final vehicle. The tariffs imposed by Canada on US-made EVs could disrupt this supply chain, causing delays, shortages, and increased costs for consumers. The average cost of a lithium-ion battery in 2023 was around $139 per kWh. But with tariffs on raw materials, prices for batteries may rise, potentially pushing the cost per kWh to $150. Given that a typical EV like the Tesla Model 3 uses a 54 kWh battery, this could increase the cost of the vehicle by up to $900. The US and Canada trade approximately $932 billion worth of goods annually, with the automotive sector making up a significant chunk of that total. With tariffs affecting the EV sector, automakers may be forced to source parts from other countries, further complicating the already strained global supply chains. If you live in a region where EV production is disrupted, you might find that the availability of certain models diminishes. This could lead to longer waiting times for the car you want, or in some cases, higher prices on used EVs as demand outpaces supply. Additionally, battery prices could rise, and this increase would likely be passed down to consumers. For anyone thinking about buying an EV in the near future, these disruptions could delay your purchase or make it more expensive than anticipated. Beyond the immediate impact on consumers and automakers, these tariffs could have a ripple effect throughout the North American economy. For example, if the U.S. and Canada continue their tariff policies, it could increase the cost of manufacturing not just for automakers, but for the broader manufacturing sector as well. As the U.S. depends heavily on imports of raw materials from Canada, this could push up prices across many industries, not just for electric vehicles. The automotive industry in North America contributes over $62.1 billion to the Canadian economy and is a significant employer. The 25% tariff on U.S.-made electric vehicles could have far-reaching effects on over 125,000 Canadian jobs tied to vehicle manufacturing. In 2023, the total trade value between the U.S. and Canada was around $932 billion, and tariffs on vehicles alone account for nearly $30 billion of that total. With these tariffs now in place, the overall cost of goods, from vehicles to steel, could see an increase of up to 10% in prices. In everyday terms, this means that many goods, not just cars, could become more expensive. If the cost of building and shipping vehicles increases, consumers might find themselves paying more for everything from new cars to electronics. Additionally, if the tariff-induced uncertainty causes delays in the production of goods, it could lead to further supply chain disruptions, resulting in shortages and rising prices in everyday consumer products. Despite these challenges, North America's push toward EV adoption is unlikely to slow down completely. Governments are still heavily invested in the green transition, with policies to encourage clean energy, reduce emissions, and promote electric vehicles. In the U.S., President Biden's government has allocated funds to support the electric vehicle market, including subsidies for EV buyers and investments in battery manufacturing. In 2024, the global electric vehicle market size was valued at $1,328.08 billion, and it's expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate (CAGR) of 32.5% from 2025 to 2030. North America alone saw a 60% increase in EV sales in 2024 compared to the previous year, with 1.4 million electric vehicles sold. The U.S. government has invested over $7.5 billion into EV infrastructure, including charging stations and battery research, and the Biden administration aims to have 50% of all new car sales be electric by 2030. However, these tariffs could create a scenario where automakers and consumers find themselves in a paradox. While the global push toward electrification grows, protectionist measures like tariffs could make it harder for consumers to transition to EVs. Additionally, if automakers are unable to pass on these tariffs without impacting the final price, it could slow the pace at which EVs become affordable and accessible to the average consumer. If you're a prospective EV buyer, you might have to wait longer for incentives and policies to take effect or see higher costs for EVs in the interim. It could also mean fewer affordable options for those who want to transition from gas-powered cars to cleaner alternatives. To sum up, the imposition of tariffs on electric vehicles in North America is a significant setback for the EV transition. While the green movement is gaining momentum across the globe, protectionist policies and trade wars are posing serious challenges for automakers and consumers alike. The rise in EV prices, coupled with supply chain disruptions, could slow down adoption and make it harder for the average consumer to make the switch to an electric vehicle. While government incentives and industry support remain crucial, the current tariff situation could create roadblocks that delay the transition to a greener, more sustainable future. However, it's not all bad news. Governments and automakers are resilient, and many are finding ways to adapt to these changes. As the world shifts toward a clean energy future, we can still hope for solutions that make EVs more affordable and accessible. Hold on to your seats. A global trade shockwave is happening as Italy steps in to fill the void left by U.S. tariffs on Canada, a twist so unexpected, even the EU is in disbelief. In 2020, Italian exports stormed into Canada with a staggering $1.5 billion, and their wines alone smashed U.S. numbers with $409 million in sales. Welcome back. Today, we're diving into one of the most jaw-dropping shifts in international trade. Italy, long renowned for its culinary excellence, is now rewriting the rules in Canada's agri-food market. Thanks to slashing customs barriers, Italian wines and cheeses are flying off the shelves, leaving traditional powerhouses like the U.S. trailing behind. Stay tuned as we explore how Italy's explosive market entry is shaking up global trade and what this means for consumers and producers alike. Chapter 1. Background on Trump's tariffs. Let's start by setting the stage. Back in 2018, President Donald Trump imposed a series of tariffs on several nations, citing unfair trade practices. Among the hardest-hit countries were Canada and Mexico, as well as China. For Canada, the U.S. tariffs were particularly damaging because the two countries share one of the largest trading relationships in the world. In fact, the U.S. is Canada's largest trading partner, accounting for approximately 70% of Canada's total exports. Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum, which were imposed at rates of 25% and 10% respectively, were seen as a protectionist measure to bolster American industries. But Canada, a major exporter of both commodities to the U.S., quickly felt the sting of these trade restrictions. Canada's steel exports to the U.S. were valued at $6.4 billion in 2018, and with tariffs in place, that figure dropped by over 38% in subsequent years. The threat of further tariffs loomed large, adding pressure on Canada to explore other trade avenues. How does this play out in the daily lives of Canadians? For consumers, the imposition of tariffs by the U.S. can lead to higher prices on goods, especially in industries like automotive manufacturing and construction. With steel and aluminum becoming more expensive, everyday products such as cars, appliances, and even homes could see price hikes. On the flip side, this has pushed Canada to seek alternative markets, which, in the long run, could help stabilize prices as the country diversifies its trade relationships. Chapter 2. Canada's strategy to diversify trade. By mid-2019, Canada's government began to recognize that relying heavily on the U.S. market was no longer a viable long-term strategy. The possibility of further trade restrictions loomed large, especially with the looming implementation of U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. To counter this, Canadian officials turned to Europe and China as potential partners to bolster their trade portfolio. In 2020, Canada's total trade with the European Union amounted to $115.9 billion, with Italy contributing a significant share to this total. What's particularly interesting is how Canada has increasingly engaged with Italy, a country with a strong and growing presence in the Canadian market. Italy has historically been known for its high-quality food products, such as wine, cheese, olive oil, and pasta. These industries have been key drivers of Italian exports to Canada, and the relationship between these two countries has been steadily strengthening, particularly since the ratification of the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, between Canada and the European Union in 2017. For everyday Canadians, a shift toward European markets, especially Italy, could have positive effects on the availability and quality of products. Expect to see more variety in high-quality Italian food products, such as wines, cheeses, and olive oils, becoming more readily available and affordable. The tariff reductions under CETA could also mean better pricing on many Italian imports, allowing Canadians to enjoy luxury items like artisanal foods, without the steep markup typically associated with imported goods. Chapter 3. Italy's role in Canada's trade landscape. Italy's presence in the Canadian market is particularly notable in the agri-food sector. According to the most recent data, Italy is Canada's third-largest supplier of agri-food products, trailing only the United States and Mexico. In 2020 alone, Italian agri-food exports to Canada were valued at approximately $1.5 billion. This increase in trade is largely driven by CETA, which has reduced customs barriers and improved market access for Italian goods. The deal has been particularly beneficial for Italian food products, especially those in high demand among Canadian consumers, such as wines and cheeses. In fact, Italy has surpassed the U.S. as Canada's second-largest supplier of wine, with Italian wine exports to Canada reaching approximately $409 million in 2020. With the looming threat of U.S. tariffs, Canada saw an opportunity to further strengthen its relationship with Italy, positioning Italian products as a viable alternative to American imports in several key sectors. For Canadian consumers, this shift could mean an expansion of choices, particularly